All right, good afternoon. My name is Sonia Schmid, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Science and Technology and Society at Virginia Tech here in Northern Virginia, and I'm excited to welcome you all to SIREN. This is the 12th event in a series of seminars, talks, and discussion on nuclear emergency response. The series is part of my NSF Career Award on globalizing nuclear emergency response. And in the spirit of this type of grant, we emphasize the importance of both research and education in the area of nuclear emergency preparedness and response. So all SIREN speakers are meeting with graduate students as part of their engagement. And whenever possible, we plan to provide access to a recording of their lectures. SIREN is generously supported by Virginia Tech's Office of the Vice President for the National Capital Region. Many thanks to the staff of the Virginia Tech Research Center's Executive Briefing Center and the IT team for their round-the-clock support. And finally, thanks to the students, staff, and faculty in STS and also nuclear engineering for helping to make this happen. This is the last event before the summer break, and we'll resume SIREN in the fall, so please stay tuned. And if you're not on the distribution list yet, shoot me an email and I'll be happy to add you. We're live streaming this talk, and as of yesterday, we have over 20 remote participants signed up. These attendees are joining us not only from our main campus in Blacksburg, U.S. universities near and far, federal agencies, national labs, and U.S. NGOs, but also from Canada, Belgium, and Austria. Welcome. If you're watching us online, and if you would like to submit a question to our speaker, please send an email indicating your name and affiliation to siren@vt.edu. That's siren, S-I-R-E-N, at vt, as in virginiatech.edu. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Stuart Price's career has revolved around building stakeholder relations at federal nuclear energy sites. He has worked for prime contractors at the Department of Energy Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, WIPP, the DOE Yucca Mountain Project, and FUSRAP, formerly utilized sites remedial action program locations contaminated with radioactive waste in New Jersey. Following a recommendation from his counselor at Virginia Tech, he kicked off his career as environmental trainer at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant in Virginia. There, Stuart wrote the plant's first hazardous waste training programs for closed incineration and open burning operations. As a communicator, Mr. Price's work has entailed building stakeholder bridges with the U.S. Congress, local political leaders, citizen action groups, and the news media. His work has detailed transporting radioactive and hazardous wastes and preparing emergency response outreach plans. Mr. Price currently sits on the Virginia Tech English Department's Distinguished Alumni Board and lives on a property that the National Wildlife Federation has certified as a wildlife habitat. Please join me in welcoming Stuart Price.
Sonia, thank you so much. I certainly do appreciate that. And I also want to thank you for this chance to talk to you here today. My wife and I live on a small farm just south of Richmond, and being here lets me step away from my daily job of toiling in the fields and leave my coveralls on the front step. By the way, tilling the soil and stewarding the land is a whole lot harder for me than my ag professors in Blacksburg said it would be. I got my BA from Virginia Tech, and my career has involved community relations and emergency planning at federal nuclear sites with a kickoff at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant. Today, my objective is to share with you community stakeholder lessons I have learned throughout the course of my career. Afterward, I hope we can discuss our future energy needs and outreach requirements. I worked at the U.S. DOE Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, that site being designed to isolate transuranic wastes from the biosphere. There I worked for Westinghouse, the prime contractor. I've also worked at the DOE Yucca Mountain facility in Nevada. That site being designed to isolate spent irradiated fuels from the biosphere. There I worked with Framatome. And I've also worked at private properties in New Jersey contaminated with thorium. There I worked with DOE and Bechtel, the prime contractor. Now, how does community outreach affect the nuclear power business? How can stakeholders help the nuclear industry achieve its work objectives? Let's look at two challenges. One, promoting nuclear energy as a clean resource for the 21st century. This, of course, would include emergency scenarios. And two, answering the long-term questions posed by the issue of nuclear waste disposal. Who are the stakeholders we need to reach? In the energy engineering industry, a community stakeholder database may include a general audience, that being about 20% of the audience base, the dedicated audience, that being about 5% of the audience base. This would be the passionate individuals who are concerned with the project. Or three, the specific interest audience base, about 75% of individuals interested in the operations. This includes distinguished stakeholders. Specific interest stakeholders warrant our greatest attention, both daily and in the event of emergency. These are the individuals who will be most interested in and most familiar with our operations. Specific interest stakeholders can include nuclear workers, lobbyists, the news media, or local citizen advisory boards. For instance, at the DOE Savannah River site, a CAB was established years ago to include stakeholders in daily operations. This has been a success. Distinguished figures include regulators, investors, influential politicians. This is where we can gain the most public support. By reaching out and forming good bonds with the mayor or with the county board, we can gain more support for our industry than if we strictly reach out to state and federal politicians. The local politicians are the persons who are most interested in our project, who have most familiarity with our project, and are the people we see every day. Before I go into specifics, let's look at a brief overview of today's global energy demand, future energy needs, and also future outreach needs. Today, our international community demands more electricity, more megawatts, using resources without the concomitant greenhouse gases. Recent international agreements, for instance, the UN Conference of the Parties 21 in Paris, support additional nuclear resources as well as solar, wind, hydro, biomass, geothermal, and yes, even fossil natural gas. The nation of China, for example, has highlighted its goals of extending nuclear power investments in the coming years as a clean, low-carbon resource. The State Grid Corporation of China, a government-owned utility, will lead this effort. In the EPA Clean Power Plan, U.S. regulations direct states to craft generation plans to reduce GHGs. This plan establishes emissions rate credits to new and uprated nuclear plants. The Supreme Court, however, issued a stay in February of 2016 pending an appellate court judgment due in June. Some states like Florida, West Virginia, Texas, Missouri, Alabama have lauded this Supreme Court delay. In fact, the major lobby representing the national businesses, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, based in Washington, supports these states seeking to defeat this regulation. Other states like California, New York, Illinois, Virginia continue their GHG mitigation efforts to comply with projected state demands. As part of the energy infrastructure needed to reduce GHG emissions, the nuclear power industry needs to craft community plans today to advance clean capacity. Let's look at regulation. The NRC. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission lists 100 domestic operating reactors. Most of these reactors are located east of the Mississippi. They also have 28 combined license reactor applications. Thank you. 13 of these applications have been withdrawn or suspended recently. 8 of the applications are under current review. For example, Turkey Point number 6 and number 7. 7 applications have been issued. The newest operating license was issued for Watts Bar number 2. Nuclear stations generate about 20% of our nation's power. This means that nuclear reactors generate a lot of electricity. Baseload capacity, baseload capacity. The top power companies controlling the most reactors include Exelon, based in Chicago, Entergy, New Orleans, and Duke Energy, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's look at new nuclear power projects. Without a doubt, building new nuclear power projects is expensive, requiring significant upfront costs. The nuclear power company officials have estimated such single reactor costs of between $5 and $10 billion. Watts Bar number 2, the most recent addition to the nation's nuclear lineup, this new reactor will be able to generate about 1150 megawatts of electricity. It's a Westinghouse 4-loop pressurized water reactor located in southeast Tennessee. The site is run by the Tennessee Valley Authority. Slated to go critical and begin producing power in the coming weeks, TVA had originally suspended construction of Watts Bar number 2 back in 1985. In October of 2015, the NRC issued a letter and full power operating license for this unit. Bechtel, the engineering contractor, completed construction of Watts Bar number 2. Bechtel states that this unit will be able to power about 650,000 homes. Bechtel Worldwide Corporation, based in San Francisco, has its nuclear environmental office nearby in Reston, Virginia. With a pre-approved stakeholder database, the nuclear industry, in this case the TVA, has the opportunity to reach out and highlight power produced by Watts Bar number 2. This opportunity is wholly optional. TVA may choose not to highlight these activities for extraneous reasons, including homeland security issues. However, it's important for the facility, the owner, to have the option to do so. Having that option is very important. Now, let's look at another new proposed reactor with a less than favorable situation. The Turkey Point station currently houses units number 3 and 4. Both happen to be complementary Westinghouse pressurized water reactors. Turkey Point stands in the southern tip of Florida, in Homestead, Florida, 20 miles south of Miami, between the Atlantic Ocean and the Everglades. In 2009, Florida Power and Light proposed building 2 reactors, number 6 and number 7, at the current Turkey Point station. The proposal notes using 2 Westinghouse AP1000 reactors. Estimated cost, about $18 billion. However, last week, on April 20th, the 3rd District Court of Appeals in Miami, a state court, ruled that FPL must delay plans to build. The court reversed an order that had been set by Governor Rick Walker and the state siting board in 2014. The court upheld the appeal brought by Miami-Dade County. The court ruled that the board failed to recognize land development guidelines, recognize endangered wildlife habitat, acknowledge Everglades ordinances, and properly apply costs of constructing new transmission lines. In its ruling, the 3-judge court recommended the task of authorizing construction to the siting board. This board must now take into consideration those elements highlighted by the court. The appellate, Miami-Dade County, is one of FPL's most distinguished stakeholders. In fact, most of us would be surprised to learn that a county would choose to protest having a utility build an $18 billion project in this territory. But that is the case in southern Florida. It seems as if, in assuming this multi-billion-dollar deal, FPL had not properly managed its consent-based community relations agenda. The locals did not want more reactors placed in the environmentally sensitive location, subjected to extreme weather events and rising waters. Back to the NRC. Power companies submit combined license applications to the NRC to consider building new nuclear reactors. 7 combined license applications have been issued. Fermi Unit 3 issued to Detroit Edison Company for a facility in Monroe County, Michigan, this being for an economic simplified boiling water reactor, GE Hitachi design. This unit would complement the standing Unit 2, a BWR. Detroit Edison has not yet chosen to pursue this issue. Also, the NRC issued a COL for Units 3 and 4 at the South Texas project in Bay City, Texas, south of Houston. This license for 2 advanced BWRs, GE design. Note, the standing Units 1 and 2 happen to be pressurized water designed by Westinghouse. South Texas Project Nuclear has not yet chosen to go forward. The NRC also issued a COL for Units 2 and 3 at the VC Summer site in South Carolina. Here, construction is underway for 2 Westinghouse AP1000s. The standing Unit 1 is a complementary PWR. South Carolina Electric and Gas media outreach has been very strong and very effective. The SCEG may apply for a license in 2017 or 18. Also, the NRC awarded the COL to Southern Energy for Units 3 and 4 at the Vogtle nuclear site in Waynesboro, Georgia. Here, construction is underway for Westinghouse AP1000 reactors. The standing Vogtle units happen to be a complementary PWR. Earlier this month, in fact, Tom Fanning, CEO of Southern, appeared on Bloomberg Television to speak about his company's strategy to reduce carbon emissions. Nuclear energy, he said, is critical to meeting this objective. Key to this are the Vogtle 3 and 4 units under construction. Also, he told us the corresponding cost to consumers had been reduced in recent months. With safety in mind, he said, mega project featuring this AP1000 reactors are designed with safety features following the Fukushima situation. A little bit closer to home, Dominion's application to build a North Anna Unit 3 reactor in Louisa County, Virginia, just north of Richmond, is one COL under review. Dominion has proposed building an economic simplified boiling water reactor here, designed by GE Hitachi. Unit 3 would complement Units 1 and 2, standing at North Anna right now, which happen to be PWRs. Once a COL is issued, perhaps in 2017, Dominion may or may not choose to move forward. Now, let's talk about emergencies and what role community outreach plays. Nuclear reactors, of course, have generated significant levels of carbon-free electricity since the 1950s. But accidents have occurred. Fukushima emergency linked with extreme weather events in Japan in 2011. Chernobyl emergency in Ukraine, anniversary which happens to be today, back in 1986. And the 3 Mile Island emergency in Pennsylvania, 1979. In fact, nuclear power has even entered the 2016 presidential campaign. Bernie Sanders has called for closure of Indian Point's Units 2 and 3 in the midst of that plant's 20-year relicensing bid. These reactors are located just upstate, north of New York City, managed by Energy. Bernie Sanders claims that these units pose a grave danger in case of emergency. Sanders has recently called for a moratorium on nuclear plant license renewals. Hillary Clinton has also stressed a need to address the nuclear waste situation before proceeding further with new nuclear. Donald Trump apparently supports the prospect of nuclear energy. I'm not sure about Ted Cruz's position, but the Republican National Committee has supported nuclear energy systems. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission issues the following emergency levels: unusual events, alerts, site area emergency, and general emergency, that being a major failure. What about less significant accidents? For example, an unusual event, South Carolina at the Oconee nuclear site, March 2016. Near unit number 1, an electric transformer caught fire and burned for about 30 minutes. Responders included Duke Energy and county emergency officials. This was handled as a typical industrial accident, but it took place at a nuclear site. Therefore, it gets classified in the nuclear category. In the event of emergency, a spokesman may be called upon for a news interview. During that interview, the spokesman's job is not to help the reporter put together a story. The reporter may wish to focus on sensational elements that appeal to the reader and the viewer. And reporting basic 1, 2, 3 ABC facts of an event may not help that news reporter meet their personal work objectives. Generally speaking, reporters want to move stories sparked with the following qualities, the 5 C's: cash, crime, color, controversy, and/or controversy of topic within an ongoing issue. We should acknowledge these points and realize that some reporters, perhaps based out of state or even overseas, may be prone to release sensationalized news not based on the facts. If we do see incorrect materials being disseminated in the news, our job is to correct them, if possible. Sometimes it is not possible. So, following an emergency, we need to relay our given messages and communicate our version of events. The spokesman's job is to relay the messages that best describe the situation and the actions that have been taken. As a rule of thumb, the spokesman needs to bring 3 distinct messages to the news interview following an emergency. Depending on the question, the spokesman needs to insert those messages into the answer. 1, what happened? What's the status of the situation? 2, the accident was corrected. 3, what steps will be taken in the future to prevent such accidents from happening again? This means inserting our pre-established messages into each response given. But watch out. Watch out. Do not go off topic and do not embellish, despite what the reporter may say or despite what encouragements they may give. After all, working with the news media is an opportunity to reach out to the public. This is an opportunity to reach an audience that may not be connected into your daily webcast. How can we use our stakeholder database to reach out in the event of emergency? First, we need to secure safety. We need to assure a good environment. Responders must secure the situation first. Next, we reference our pre-approved sequential list of contacts and contact our superiors, our customers, our regulators, our news media, and the community. If we have built a community stakeholder database, we know what parties to reach out to. We will have a sequential list of parties to be contacted in case of emergency. We will know what reporters to reach out to. Do we want to touch base with the New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, international outlets, or do we want to keep the message simple? Do we want to keep the message local? Do we want to reach out to our local community as the first measure? Nuclear waste management. This is more my field. This is more my work experience. The challenge is managing radioactive waste products and spent nuclear fuels, that being one of the most significant challenges to the industry. During my career, contractors and federal agencies worked with prime objective to build disposal at geologic locations. The task was clear-cut for us. We were told to develop a final disposal solution for rad wastes. From the 1980s to 2012, the mission was clear, defined by state law, but defined by federal law. Nuclear industries would pay disposal fees. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 defined the mission. The federal government would assume management and responsibility. The federal government evaluated building nuclear waste geological repositories across the country. In Michigan, Texas, New Mexico, and Nevada. The federal government made the decision to move forward with Nevada and New Mexico, largely due to geology and remote locations. The Yucca Mountain facility was basically complete. The repository comprises basalt, a dark igneous rock, and tuff. Scientists have thoroughly studied this location as the most practical location for SNFs and HLWs. However, operations at Yucca Mountain were halted around 2012, circa. Community stakeholders' framework was faulty. The local population did not want nuclear waste deposited in the backyard. The local population did not feel the need to acquire economic advantages Yucca Mountain would afford. In fact, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada led the effort to defund Yucca Mountain facility, that site managed by the DOE Nuclear Energy Office. Nuclear companies were told to maintain SNF's wet disposal operations on site and initiate dry storage facilities, if possible, as a long-term option. Today, the U.S. DOE plans involve building interim storage sites for HLWs and SNFs by 2021. New geologic repositories may be available by 2048. Consent-based community siting is the essential part of the latest federal plan. The DOE is hoping to include appropriate stakeholders in fair site selection process. The DOE wants to include stakeholders as well as those at the state and federal levels. The DOE waste isolation pilot plant process may be considered the community relations model for nuclear waste management. The WIPP, located in southern New Mexico, is located within a bedded salt deposit, part of the geologic Permian Basin. Federally owned property, the Department of Energy Office of Environmental Management manages the WIPP along with contractors. While nuclear reactor wastes include spent fuel rod assemblies, waste targeted for the WIPP include gloves, clothing, tools contaminated with hazardous waste, and radioactive transuranic elements. There's a stark difference in these waste identities and properties. WIPP waste originates at 27 DOE sites: Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Savannah River Site, Hanford, Idaho National Laboratory, and Fernald, Ohio. Now, let's look back 25 years ago when I worked at WIPP. We had not yet received waste at the site, but we ran operations as if we had. The most significant rad waste emergency I was involved with concerned a reporter who was doing a story. His equipment bag set off the radiation alarm on his way out. He was doing a story on our TruPack 2 container, that mechanism to transfer waste from laboratories to the Carlsbad, New Mexico site. He came into the facility, everything was fine, but when he left the facility at 4 p.m., the alarm went off. Why did it go off? We didn't know. We contacted the radiation manager. We scratched our heads. Finally, we determined that his camera lens had been made with thorium. That is what set off the alarm. That was the biggest emergency I was involved with. Also, at the WIPP during my stay, I co-wrote and was the lead editor on the first WIPP underground management plan. Also, the WIPP characterization plan. WIPP characterization was an essential issue before disposal began in 1999. What was important yesterday, it turns out, is just as important today, if not more so. WIPP knows emergency management. In February 5th, 2014, an accident with a salt haul truck caused a fire in the WIPP underground, populated with 86 workers. Those workers were safely evacuated, treated on site, or transferred to a medical center in Carlsbad, primarily for smoke inhalation. A few days later, on February 14th, an emergency in the WIPP underground caused the release of airborne americium and plutonium from waste containers. Underground continuous air monitors directed the contamination to high-efficiency particulate air filter banks on the surface. This was a major event. Already situated for disposal in the underground, drum 68660 from the Los Alamos National Lab breached, it burped, due to internal chemical exothermic reactions. Radioactive constituents were released into the surrounding drum overfill and onward to the HEPA filter. Subsequently, 21 persons tested positive for low-level exposure. Trace levels of americium and plutonium were detected off-site. incoming WIPP shipments were halted. Apparently, there was a failure with implementing the WIPP waste characterization process and the waste acceptance criteria format. Now, some waste drums scheduled for WIPP must undergo X-ray examination, opening, and repackaging in standard protocol. Reopening, however, was never envisioned when those drums were originally packed. March of 2014, the WIPP initiated its recovery phase. How has the WIPP and the DOE Environmental Management Office handled community relations following this project delay event? I say the WIPP unit in Carlsbad and the DOE EM in Washington have done a great job reaching out to stakeholders. During recovery, the WIPP posts its community relations website. WIPP also holds regular town hall meetings, which are streamed. Officials have also maintained a presence within the technical trade arena. The Radioactive Waste Management Symposia 2016 conference in Phoenix last month highlighted operations in the WIPP underground and true waste management. Also, established before the 2014 emergencies, the DOE initiated the Carlsbad Field Office Fellowship Program in Carlsbad. This office reaches out to high school students, undergrads, graduates, postgrads, as regards mission-oriented research concerning true waste management. This initiative involves STEM internship programs for students as regards true waste management, transportation, and disposal. This office also teams with a corresponding project in Oak Ridge. Subsequent programs in Carlsbad have included actinide chemistry, repository science, salt dome microorganisms, and conceptual AutoCAD drawings. This month's edition of Scientific American magazine features an opinion article titled "Stop Dithering on Nuclear Waste." The editors recount our nation's nuclear waste dilemma and the Yucca Mountain WIPP activities. The editors call on the DOE and the next President of the United States to act, finally, on geologic disposal. Conclusion. What have we learned? New reactors. Success breeds success, especially in energy generation. TVA will begin producing power with Watts Bar number 2 in the coming weeks. This new unit will undergo formal full testing, starts and stops. The Vogtle reactor number 3 and 4, Westinghouse AP1000s, may be the next new plants to come online. Afterward, the VC Summer Plant 2 and 3, also Westinghouse AP1000s, may be next. As regards waste management, the DOE Waste Isolation Pilot Plant is leading the way in local consent-based stakeholder relations, as well as emergency management. The WIPP may be the model for future efforts to manage and designate geologic storage for high-level wastes. Regarding the WIPP, the DOE has even reached out to me, a former employee. Just to let me know that they have taken into account persons who once worked at WIPP as regards the latest activities. As I remember, when I worked in Carlsbad, the long-standing veterans that I worked with stood beside me, said, you know, the government will probably need another WIPP. They almost never build these things big enough. Projects like this repository, they told me, will be needed in the future. The challenge now for the DOE Nuclear Energy Office is to identify a geologic area suitable to host SNFs and HLWs that is located in an area with a population favorable to accommodate these duties. To realize a suitable SNF HLW disposal program, the DOE needs to identify and foster an area as welcoming and as accommodative as Carlsbad, New Mexico. In the nuclear field, we must be ready to cope with emergencies and sensitive day-to-day activities. Preparing your stakeholder outreach system today will help you implement your contacts in case of emergency tomorrow. As regards stakeholder relations, keep the information flow valve open. Thank you. I appreciate this chance to talk to you. Now I have to get ready to go back home and get back to work in the fields. By the way, my wild blackberry crop is looking great this year. My wife says after today, my time off is over. Do we have any questions?
So just as a reminder for those participating online, if you would like to send in a question, email it to siren@vt.edu, please. Any questions? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alex Redkin, and I'm a graduate student at Arizona State in DC.
Okay.
And I'm currently working with ASU and DOE on the nuclear waste management issue.
Excellent.
And the consent-based siting approach.
Excellent.
So I was wondering if you had any insights as to any recommendations to fostering good community relations and creating a transparent process that allows trust for those that might be interested in having a nuclear waste site hosted in their community. And are there any kind of issues that can arise with maybe being too transparent, where there's information that's misinterpreted or just not understood properly? And how would you facilitate that in a smooth process given your work?
That is a fantastic question. That is a fantastic question. To build a community base, I believe the first thing you need to do is to work with the local community. You have to employ the local community as best you can. But by working on the local connections, the local political base, you have to establish relations with the mayor. You have to establish relations with the community board. You have to do this in order to build the best possible relations you can. Because when it comes to rad waste management, we're talking long term. We're talking very long term. And establishing those local relations is absolutely essential. When I worked at the Fuse Wrap project in New Jersey with Bechtel and the DOE did its best to employ as many locals in day-to-day operations at the office as possible. That's one way. That's one way to do it. Even though these people were not involved in nuclear science or nuclear activities, we still needed corresponding activities. We still needed support. That is one effort that we can do. Also, I love the community-based programs that the DOE is working now in Carlsbad. Getting the high school students involved in the operation. Doing STEM research or doing STEM internships. That builds local support. But the best way to do that, if there is one, and there are many, 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 the best way I suggest is building relations with the local political power, the local mayor. There, you can gain the best support and the best recognition for what you do every day. Thank you.
Hi, Philip Eggert, Virginia Tech, Science Technology Studies. Could you compare and contrast just a little bit what went right at WIPP versus what went wrong at Yucca Mountain from your perspective in the community outreach programs?
Yes. Okay. The WIPP is located in southeastern New Mexico. It is the community at WIPP in Carlsbad, where I lived for 3 or 4 years, and I worked with on a daily basis. They appreciated the work that WIPP offered. They appreciated the work that had been lost at the salt mines. The salt mine industry had been a major focus of employment in Carlsbad. By bringing WIPP into the area, those same individuals who had worked who had been laid off at the salt mines now had an opportunity to put their mining talents to work again. They got to do very similar operations at this new government project that, quite frankly, carried with it a lot of money. There was a great deal of public involvement, state involvement, for an essential job that needs to be done. Nuclear waste management. If you're going to have nuclear reactors, you're going to have to manage the waste. That is just that's a fact. If you don't, well, something's wrong. Yucca Mountain is relatively close to Las Vegas, Nevada. That area did not really cry out for employment, did not really cry out for the employment and the jobs, the activities that would come with long-term, permanent nuclear waste disposal. The politicians in the area had not been really adequately reached out to. Senator Harry Reid said, look, I don't want this in my backyard. Even though we've got a federal law that says this is going to happen, I don't want it here, so I am not going to let it happen here. And he did not let it happen there. So, as I said, the DOE has got to find an area with a suitable geology, with a population, a populace that wants employment, that wants the benefits that come with a long-term federal government program. The activities in WIPP, Carlsbad, and Yucca Mountain, Las Vegas area are quite different.
Well, we have one question from Ms. Melissa Ratliff, a concerned citizen. She asks, Mr. Price, how much money has been invested in the National Nuclear Waste Management Program? And then also the second question, how can we proceed with nuclear energy when we don't really know what to do with the end product, spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste? Thank you.
Wow. Money spent. Billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. I do have a couple of figures on that. The Nuclear Energy Institute put out some information that said the Nuclear Waste Fund, which is a tax, or which is a fee attached to nuclear energy programs, had collected about $29 billion had been paid into that fund as of 2013. Also, the government has planned to reimburse spent nuclear fuel parties about $3.7 billion concerning lawsuits. Future liability on that issue projected by the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, of about $21.4 billion. GE Hitachi put out another number. They were saying that to manage spent nuclear fuels in the U.S. costs about $40 billion as of 2015. Yucca Mountain, as a facility, totaled about $8 billion. What is Yucca Mountain status today? There is none. It is an inactive project. It is dead in the water. So that $8 billion that had been invested is no more. Is no more. Is that the best management? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But to answer that question on the money, billions upon billions. I think we would need another GAO study just on that question to find out how much money the U.S. government and nuclear utilities have invested in nuclear waste disposal, nuclear waste management. The second part of that question, how can we continue moving forward with nuclear energy if we don't know what to do with its end product? If we don't have a firm view for managing the end product? Good question. When I went to Virginia Tech, and when I started my career, I learned that an engineering operation has three basic parts. One, conceptualization. You define what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Two, you conduct that operation. And three, you manage the back side of that operation. You manage the end point of that operation. That, I learned, is the responsible way to manage an engineering project. 1, 2, 3. Right now, as far as rad waste management goes, okay, we know what we should do. We know what we should do, and we're doing it. We are generating that nuclear waste. As far as finishing that end point, well, it's not there. We do not have a viable solution for managing our end product at this point in time. Of course, it seems to me that that is a worldwide phenomenon. I don't know. We have over 400 reactors. Countries are using nuclear power to generate a great deal of electricity, a great deal of power. But I am not familiar with any country that has in place a viable spent nuclear fuel, high-level waste disposal program. That's not what I learned. That's not how I was told things were to be conducted. But that seems to be the way things are conducted today. The DOE is thinking about, as I understand it, forming another office to manage nuclear wastes outside of the Department of Energy. It seems to me that might have already been done, but it's going to be done again. And I don't think, from what I know, it's not the best way to manage a project, but that is the way nuclear energy is being managed in this nation and across the world, as far as I know, right here, right now. So that's a good question.
Well, as a follow-on to that question, that maybe you're saying implicitly, a follow-on to that question then is maybe you're saying implicitly that nuclear power is just too difficult to continue with, that between the dollar costs, the psychic costs, if you will, that so many locations don't want that nearby, the actual dangers of a Fukushima or something actually occurring, that the cost savings of having clean nuclear power may not be worth it compared to alternatives. Thank you. Response is what I'm interested in.
That's a good question.
I'm Jeff Glick, and I'm an adjunct prof here at Virginia Tech.
Great. That is an excellent question. As far as I know, we need energy. We need energy to run our world, and nuclear energy is a great way to maintain that baseload capacity. Nuclear energy is a necessary energy source. If you go all renewable, you're not going to get that baseload capacity. If you go all coal, well, then we have greenhouse gases to contend with. And those energy companies are declaring bankruptcy right and left these days. So that doesn't seem to be a viable option. Natural gas, well, sure, that's been the stepping stone for leading from coal to renewable for quite some time. Maybe we continue employing more natural gas. But I'm just thinking that as far as engineering management goes, to conduct an operation with vigor without having a defined endpoint, a defined solution to manage the end product, seems to me to be less than entirely responsible. Good question.
So I have a question to Sonja Schmid, Virginia Tech.
Please.
I wanted to bring this back to the emergency situation
Sure.
and communicating in an emergency situation. Given that today is the 30th anniversary, in scare quotes, of Chernobyl, what the Soviets did with some delay was exactly the 3 steps that you said. They said there was an accident, the government is taking care of it, and I forgot what the third one was. And the steps are taken, these are the steps taken to remedy the situation. So it sounds a little cynical to propose that this is the way to communicate when you have a situation that is ongoing, where you don't know what happened, where you don't know what steps are to be taken or how to address the situation. Can you say a little bit more about what is the goal of good community relations in the midst of an emergency? What do you tell people while things are going on, while it's unclear what is going on except something bad is happening? How do you reach out if your list of pre-approved contacts doesn't work, doesn't exist, is otherwise engaged? As a communicator, where do you start? What is your proposal?
Sonja, I think you're talking about a full-blown intense emergency. In that event, the communicator's primary responsibility is to ensure safety to do whatever they can to ensure safety. The communicator's primary responsibility in that situation would be to communicate to the local population. You have to tell the local population what's going on and what they can do, how they can best safeguard themselves and their own situations. We can't talk about projected plans yet because you're right, we don't know what they are yet. When you have I think that sort of Chernobyl emergency, you can throw all these plans out the window. I mean, because you're in such an intense situation that these plans, which may be good for lesser disasters, would just not be applicable at this point. But the communicator still has a very important job. The communicator still has to reach out to the local population, the local transportation industries, the local persons coming into and out of the area. The local communication has got to be, this is what's going on, it's a very dangerous situation. You want to be very careful into coming into this area if you are bound and determined to come into this area. But if the people who are doing so don't know what's going on, a lack of information spurs more anxiety and it spurs more danger. A lack of information is a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay in place very long. They get filled in by other sources. So the communicator needs to do his or her best to make sure that the message is spread out in the best way both electronically, through websites, through the local community who has the best outreach capacity. You have to get to those people. If they know what people they can reach out to, that's a very important job. Communication, though, is absolutely vital in the event of even the worst emergency. You've got to get the word out. You've got to tell people what's going on.
I guess my question is more, what if the word is not clear? What if the communicator doesn't know what to tell the local population? Stay put, shelter in place, evacuate, you know, and this is what we've seen both in Chernobyl and in Fukushima yet again, that this basic message was not clear, and it wasn't helped by, you know, international or you know, other nations issuing contradictory information or advice, you know, after Fukushima, for example. How do you, as a communicator, address contradictory information? How do you communicate that, or how do you choose what to tell people when you don't have clear information?
That is a very difficult question. As a communicator, you have to have levels of outreach, levels of reaching out to the public. The first level of any communications is safety. If you're not sure about what to do, about how to implement that safety, the basic, the most fundamental communications that you can think of, I would have to study that issue even further. I have, in every situation, it's generally clear how you can be safest, how you can best preserve your own safety. If you're in a situation where you don't know how to communicate your best safety, I would have to figure out, I would have to study that to find out the best way to communicate in that situation. Of course, I've never been in that situation before. Chernobyl, of course, yes, even today, that is an ongoing topic. But I would not know how. I would have to study that further.
Questions?
Hello, Dan Miller. I'm a
Hi, Dan.
PhD student at STS here at Virginia Tech. You know, talking about just that this conversation about, you know, what do you communicate when you don't know, and Stuart, you mentioned about being very engaged with the local governments. Really, I would assume it would have to be ongoing all the time. You have a relationship built up with the local community.
Keep the information flow valve open.
Right. So I guess looking if you don't know the extent of an emergency, you know, a very dramatic Fukushima type or Chernobyl type emergency, or even a 3 Mile Island early on when you didn't really know what was going to happen. I guess could you kind of thinking out loud, could you treat this as somewhat like hurricane evacuations even? I mean, there's worst case. You know, the hurricane can hit the city. Maybe you need to evacuate everyone, you know, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people. But it may not. You know, it may not happen. And then the consequences of evacuation have their own consequences there. People dying during the evacuation, that type of thing. So I guess looking at that relationship with the community, so that nuclear community, I guess you could call it, if you have that relationship, they would have to understand that there could be times when we don't know, but you may have to take that extreme, those extreme actions where right up front the correct information is generally that's assuming the correct information is, hey, we've got everything under control. But in this case, we just plain do not know. You're going to have to take this extreme, basically evacuation would really
I
action.
think another comparable issue would be the World Trade Center. When the crash happened, the person on the loudspeaker said, "Remain in place. You know, do not panic. Stay at your desk." And that turned out to be exactly the wrong thing to say. But that was a voice coming from above, coming from the loudspeaker, that's going to be the immediate word that we get. And, well, you know, like most people will probably assume that that's the thing to do. If that's what the sheriff is telling you, or that is what the local official is telling you to do, you're probably going to take that as the best advice. Was it the best advice? No. Could the voice of authority give incorrect information in the event of a nuclear emergency? Yes. Should we recognize that? Yes. But I think as far as maintaining safety goes, if we do not know how to maintain safety in the event of emergency, if we do not know what to do, evacuation would be the immediate call, because you're not going to stay there if you're not sure what to do. You want to take some sort of action. You're going to want to do something. You're not just going to want to stay at your desk and say, well, something really bad is happening out there, and I'm going to do nothing. You're going to do something. You're going to want to do something. You're going to want to take some sort of action. That's human nature. That's human nature. So, as far as communications go, they can be right, they might be wrong. Again, that question would deserve more attention.
Usually the way it works in a natural disaster, there's always conflicts. And what they do is they have, quote, official sources. The National Weather Service versus weather.com or, you know, Weatherby or some of these others. So they'll have reliable sources by which they make their judgments, right or wrong or both, a little bit of each. So that's how they handle it. And I suspect in the nuclear industry, that's how they handle it too. They go to the NRC, they go to DOE official, there's official plume, official organizations that create plume models that they use versus unofficial plume models. So it's not just, you know, I guess we'll just sort of throw it up in the air. When they establish these programs, they have official sources of information for crisis management as well as for day-to-day management. And they rely on those. They can be wrong, obviously, or they can be even in conflict within themselves. But that's where the organizations go, and I would assume in this case as well.
I think that as far as the communication go, we've got the responsibility not to be the leader, not to be the authority making this declaration, but to report the declaration, to report what we're being told by the national academies, by the site operator, National Academies of Science. No. I just mean as a top-level official. What person you want to take direction from. Do you want to listen to the local sheriff? Do you want to listen to the site operator? Do you want to listen to the local health advisor? The communicator cannot make that choice. The communicator can only report. The communicator can only report what those influential parties are saying.
Thanks. I'm Armin Maselli. I've worked with the International Red Cross on nuclear preparedness and emergencies. One of the things that we found was that there's basically two issues. One is the trust of the population in both the science and the authority issuing the guidance. And in many cases, you won't have agreement with the science. And particularly here in the United States and in most developed countries, you'll end up having talking heads where you get the official word from government or science, and then you have people on CNN or whatever that's giving conflicting information or different information. The second thing is, based on the experience that's happened in the past, there's really a very low trust level in terms of even dealing with government or dealing with authorities in terms of what's the nature and the scope of the incident and what you should be doing. And so I think that is the basics that you need to get at. In working, it seemed the communication element was the most difficult of all you could sort out the technical stuff, you can sort out the behavioral stuff, et cetera, but be able to communicate that clear message, the one that people understand, and two, that they trust, is a really big issue, particularly in this type of incident. People know if there's a flood, get out of the floodplain. People know if there's a hurricane, common sense, get out of the tidal surge and evacuate.
Sure.
With the nuclear stuff, boy, it's a different ballgame in terms of just exactly what the risk is and who do you trust and what they're saying.
Who do you trust? The Red Cross officials? Who do you trust? I keep coming back to the local authorities, the local sheriff, the local mayor. Do you trust the words of advice that they give, or do we? That's a good question. It deserves a lot more. It deserves a conversation, and that might be a question that's never answered fully and completely and satisfactorily.
Well, I'd like to follow up, and then we have one more online question. It just puzzles me that, 3 Mile Island happened in 1979, and when you watch the TV recordings from that time and how they struggled with communicating with anybody, I mean, whether it was the governor or the public or the media, it kind of strikes me that it's interesting that in the nuclear industry, there's still the attempt to provide the ultimately correct information, rather than acknowledging that there is a period where there is uncertain information. And there's, to my knowledge, there hasn't been enough done to study and to, test how to communicate uncertain information, even to your stakeholders. Because if the trust dimension is so critical and so fundamental, then you have to be able to say, I would think, look, we don't know what's going on right now. This is what we know, and this is, the big blind spot that we're still working on. Right now, it looks like strategy A is the best thing you can do, shelter in place, for example. This may change, so please stay tuned. But this doesn't seem to be happening. There doesn't seem to be, there's still this quest for the one correct message that is clear and understandable and that people will follow. But it seems to me that there's actually many, many steps in this one message. We can't necessarily assume that, people understand, will follow directions, and trust that the information provided is correct. Those are all, different dimensions of this one message. So if you have, as you said, the long-standing, trusting relationship with a local community, it should be possible to do better, to communicate better, not in the sense of providing better and more correct information, but to provide authentic, relations, and to say, we don't know. But that doesn't seem to be an option.
Okay. My mind is going 1,000 miles an hour. In the event of emergency, if you do not know, you have very hard decisions to make. Maybe it's not possible to come up with one answer, with one point of recommendation. This is what you should do. Right. This is right. This is the thing you need to do right now. That might be impossible to do. You may not be able to do that. However, if you're talking about rad waste, nuclear emergency, look at the population that you're addressing. Look at your target audience at that point. It's a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe more. You have to fill the void. You have got to come out, you have got to offer some sort of direction. Because without some direction, panic is going to ensue. You don't want that. You do not want anarchy at that point. You want to make sure that the people can afford some trust in what is going on. You just have to do it. You have to be able to give them some direction. That is absolutely essential. Might it be slightly incorrect? Well, maybe. Might it be not the best thing to do? Well, maybe. But if, in case of emergency, if you do not have some direction to follow, you're simply inviting chaos. And I think that would be even more deleterious to the situation. To have people throw up their arms and say, well, we don't know what to do. We're just going to... That's not how you want to handle an emergency situation. You want to give some leadership, some direction. I absolutely, intensely believe that, firmly believe that.
Thank you, sir. Very interesting talk. Pat Sullivan, Virginia Tech. I guess my question is it's more of a comment that I'd like you to respond to. If in an emergency now, what's going to happen if the waste plant or whatever doesn't comment, or the local government doesn't comment? There really isn't going to be a vacuum, because you've got Twitter, you've got text message broadcast. Right. There's going to be a whole lot of stuff. Right. I mean, it's going to be a very fast rumor mill. So it strikes me that whatever the official communicators do, they're going to have to do it very quickly. And that's I think that problem has gotten worse since 3 Mile Island, when people got information through press releases. Have there been any
through social media?
Okay, so that would be your plan too. Would be to do it through social media as well, or?
I think in an emergency you have to get the information out. You have to get your information out, and you're right. You will be your message will be overwhelmed by the social media venues. But I think if you don't do that, if you're just write out a press release and send it out, that's not going to work. That's not going to work today. Communications has advanced incredibly. So I think that social media, if you don't use it, you're going to get burned by it. You're going to get overwhelmed by it. If you need to get your messages out, I think, unless someone tells me differently, that's going to be the major venue for you to communicate.
All right, I have one question from Georges Vassier that kind of brings us back to the waste issues.
Sure.
Reprocessing leaves you with only 4% of the original waste volume. Is there an option in the US to go this way? As you know, this is the way Europe is going. There are also research projects to shorten the lifetime of waste. What is the program in the US in this area?
As I recall, President Carter signed a law saying that reprocessing will not be done. That will not be an option for the USA. It would take a pretty large act of Congress and the states to derail that, as I understand it. So I don't know. I do not think that is currently an option that is being seriously weighed by the U.S. government or by the U.S. regulators. Might it come up at a later date? Maybe. It might come up, but I don't think that's currently an option. Was there another part to that question? Is that unfortunate? Maybe. Maybe. Do we need to take lessons? Do we need to work with the international community to decide these issues? Maybe, maybe. But we've got our own problems and our own situations right here, right now, and we are going to have to make the best decisions that we can to take care of the situation. As far as postponing geologic disposal for another 40 years, I don't think that's... Like I said, when I worked at WIPP and at Yucca Mountain, and that was not the strategy we were employing. I was always under the assumption that Yucca Mountain and WIPP, Yucca Mountain over here and WIPP over here, were going to be the geologic endpoints for our nuclear activities. Is that the case anymore? No. Is the Department of Energy looking more so toward long-term interim storage at a spot in the at a holding site in the western U.S.? Seems to be. Is that the way it will end up? I don't think so. I think we will take actions, perhaps in the next administration.
Final question.
So, since we're back on nuclear waste, I wanted to mention that, so the current design strategy for DOE and its consent-based approach for a
Sure.
long-term storage site
Yes, sir.
is working with ECAST, which is a network that involves local communities. So there's 7 cities currently that DOE will be traveling to, and
Okay.
engaging citizens in day-long activities where they receive a packet of information prior to attending this forum, where there are experts, stakeholders, DOE representatives that are all interacting after the citizens themselves deliberate amongst themselves and actually come up with policy recommendations. So it's basically there's no outside influence. Their experts are there just to answer questions. So they're doing this in 7 different cities. I know Boston is one. There's
Really?
a city in New Mexico and a couple of others that they're going to be trying this design to see how it works, see if it works in terms of actually, solidifying some sort of bond with the community that's worthwhile, that, can help us move ahead. Because I think that's the true issue, especially with Yucca Mountain. It was the fact that the community didn't want the nuclear waste site, that there was uncertainty surrounding it, although the site itself was pretty much, by the experts, claimed to be very safe for many years to come. The fact that there was just a little bit of uncertainty, and the fact that you can't communicate it in a way that's effective and transparent, it can lead to problems. And I just wanted to share that bit.
Thank you. Would one of those options be I read this the other day, a 3-mile long hole injecting waste 3 miles into the earth?
Wow.
From maybe it was maybe I read that in an unresponsive location.
Yeah.
But because the DOE in years past has looked at shooting it into outer space. Take the waste, rocket it on out. Take the waste, dump in the ocean. Did we look at that? Did the government look at that? Yes, as I understand it, the government looked at that as an option. Burying it so deep into the earth that we can just say, well, it's gone now, and not worry about it later, that was an option. The WIPP is about 2,150 feet below ground. What we always said was about half a mile underground. The Yucca Mountain is in a mountain. It's not underground so much as in a mountain, slightly in a mountain. Deep disposal, I know we looked at that, and the government looked at that in the 1960s or 70s as an option. So most of the options have been evaluated. I think the national academies may have looked at that as well. And there's no group of authorities that garner more respect than the national academies.
There's uncertainty surrounding every single possible alternative.
Yes.
And if you're not able to be transparent about that uncertainty, then it is difficult to actually deliver an actionable plan to a community and have them, partake in a process of negotiation in terms of, setting up the incentives that come with the federal program, like you were saying, of
Right.
in your city.
Right.
So if you can't have that initial conversation of the possible dangers, if you can't honestly communicate about that, then it's kind of a non-starter, because you have distrust, and right from the get-go, the message is just
I agree.
distorted, in my view.
I agree. You have to have a dialogue. You have to possibly go to a community, say, This is the benefit we're getting from nuclear energy right now. When we're getting substantial, significant benefits from nuclear energy right here. However, we do have this end product that we need to deal with. Do we have firm plans to deal with it? No. What do you think? What are your ideas on the subject? Reaching for ideas and engaging the public in conversation, engaging the national academies in the conversation. These are all issues we need to do because this is a large situation for this country. It's a large situation for the world, and we need to come up with an answer. We need to come up with a final solution. If we don't, we're just going to have interim storage sites in the desert that are long-term holds, and that is also one option. That is also one option that has been considered. Should we just hold on to this? We'll figure it out one day. We'll figure it. The next generation, well, they'll be smarter than we are. They'll figure out how to deal with this. Is that responsible? Well, I don't think so. But you bring up some very good points. I appreciate them.
All right, we're out of time, but you're welcome to join us outside for lunch. And if you have any questions, our online attendees, please feel free to email either to me or to Stuart directly. Please join me in thanking our speaker today. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.